As fate would have it, this is take two of the Pushing 60 Aside podcast for this evening. Today's date is February the 18th in the year 2023. This is season 5, episode number 7. Thank you for tuning in to the podcast. If you're a first-time listener, what is the Pushing 60 Aside podcast all about? Originally, it was designed for people who are approaching age 60, but as our listenership grew, the podcast is slanted more toward people that have already turned 60, that are already in retirement, and are already trying to ferret out ways to stay healthy for their remaining years, whether that's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, and who knows, maybe some will break the 100-year mark with a good quality life. And how are we going to do that? What are you going to do to give yourself a good old fighting chance to be successful and healthy in your senior years and to enjoy them and to maintain your independence to where the options are in your court, not somebody else's? I think about these things a lot. And since I work with senior population and I teach fitness classes to seniors that range in age from about 60 right on up to as old as they get, and I've had people as old as 94 in my classes. And that may sound odd to you. Maybe you can't imagine yourself being at the ripe old age of 94 and going somewhere and exercising 3 times a week. But I'm going to tell you, there are seniors that are doing that, and they amaze me every single class with their vitality, their enthusiasm, their strength, their willingness to participate in exercise because they know this is good for them. This is the very thing their doctors have been telling them for decades. Exercise and eat healthy food. And I'd like to think that most of them are at least getting the exercise part of that right. And some of them are actively working on eating a healthier diet. And so as we proceed into the podcast tonight, what's so important that I felt it was worth recording both in the audio version of the podcast and in this video version of the podcast? What's so important that I would take 20, 30, 40 minutes of your time to talk about? Well, I wanted to call this podcast Playing with Your Brain. And I think it's a topic that might sound scary at first. No, we're not going to take our brains out and toss them in the air like a ball. No, but we're going to talk about what it takes to keep these brains in peak operating condition as best we can. And, there's not a NASCAR racer in the United States that doesn't give his car a thorough inspection and checkups and tune-ups and tightenings and adjustments before a major race, because he wants that car to be at peak performance. And what if there are things that we can do that are within our realm of control to help our brains function at their very best and to continue to function well for years to come? First of all, let's talk about some of the things that you've probably already noticed. I have, and I know for a fact that people that I train have noticed this. Have you ever had that experience where you walk into the kitchen for a reason, and when you get there, suddenly you don't know why you walked in there? Surely you went in there to get something. Maybe you have a drawer like we have that we call the junk drawer, and in that are pens and pencils and pads and case cutters for opening our Amazon packages, things like that, pencil sharpeners, just odds and ends. But you're standing there in the kitchen and you say, I was in the back perhaps, or I was outside and I thought, I'm gonna go in the kitchen and get, and then you get to that point and you say, why'd I come in here? We've all done that. Folks, that's normal. That happens to all of us, and it happens, and it can happen long before we reach that magic age of 60 or 65 or 70. And it's not just forgetfulness. Sometimes it can be a bit of distraction. Maybe the phone rang on the way to the kitchen, and you checked it and saw that it was a spam call, and then you walked on toward the kitchen. But in that moment, you broke your pattern of thought about what it was you wanted to go get. And, stuff like that happens. So that's normal. That is not brain deterioration. We all have that at some level. And sometimes we'll be in a conversation with somebody and maybe they love movies like you do, and you go to talk about an actor that you love that you saw in a movie last night on Netflix, and you go to tell your friend and you say, and that actor, what's his name? Oh, you know the guy. He was in that movie about those thugs and those drug lords and the FBI, and you remember, right? Had black hair, and we all do that. We all do that. And then maybe later that afternoon, you're going, Nicolas Cage. It was Nicolas Cage. Why couldn't I remember Nicolas Cage? And, that's normal stuff. We all experience that from time to time. If I ask you to name all your teachers you had through high school, you probably couldn't name them. You probably couldn't say their first names for sure. But what if you're sitting there and occasionally you just tried to go down and recall every teacher you had, the class you had him or her for, and their last names. That's all, just that. A mental exercise. This is kind of drills I'm talking about, stirring with and playing with the brain to test our memory. And if we can't remember a specific teacher, maybe that teacher wasn't that good to start with. But there are teachers that we can pull their names up just like that until you get ready to talk about that teacher at a class reunion. And you say, oh, remember Mrs. She taught Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 and business ed. And the other person says, oh, that was Mrs. Carmichael or some other teacher. I'm just making names up now. And so those things we all struggle with as we age, but some of us have been struggling with those things for a long time. And we thought, oh no, I've got dementia, or perhaps I'm getting Alzheimer's or something like that. But that's not true. That's not that true, although that can happen, but it's generally speaking not true. So what if we purposefully did things to take care of ourselves? Suppose we just tried to eat more healthy food, more colorful vegetables and fruits, and we reduced the junk food, the heavily salted snacks, and the excessively sweet, sugary snacks. What if we tried to eliminate some of that, and we started eating modest portions of whatever we ate? And what if we eliminated some things that we don't need altogether? We just don't need them. Perhaps we could see a shift in our health, a shift in our weight, a shift in our body composition, which is the thing that I think really is the benchmark of health is, what's your body made out of? And most of us do not know. We don't know what percentage of us is fat, what percent is lean muscle, what percent is water, and how much of us is bone. We don't know that, but there are scales out there that can break it down for you just like that. And I find that information to be much more useful than getting on my scales and waiting for a dial to spin and rock up to a point where it says 185 pounds, just like that. Okay, what is that 185 pounds? What if I knew that 18% of it was fat? Would I be upset about that? Is that a bad number? Is it a good number? What if 6.2 pounds of it is nothing but bones? And what if 50% of me was just water? What if 41% of my total mass was muscle? Is that a good number? Is it average for my age? Those are numbers that I can look at besides just what I weigh as an individual. So what if we paid attention to our weight, learned what our body composition is, ate healthy foods, and what if we did things to stimulate our brains every single day? What do? I've talked about this some in some recent podcasts, but I work every crossword that comes in our local newspaper. And there's 4 of them a week. We only get the paper twice a week. There's 2 per paper. I work them all. Sometimes it's a challenge. sometimes not so much. But because of that, I stretch my brain and work and solve a problem. That's good for my brain. That's a skill set that's here in my head. And if I exercise that skill set, I'm kind of like that NASCAR driver who's constantly tweaking and tuning and keeping his car in peak performance. What if I can help keep my brain in peak performance for me? What if I can learn completely new things? I'm a person who likes to solve problems. In the last couple of years, I had a couple of gas-powered engines that would not crank for me. One was on a pressure washer, the other one was on a riding lawnmower. And the likely answer was bad gas and the fact that those carburetors sat over winter. I have never really been a mechanic. Sure, I can do the basics, check the fluids, check the air pressure in the tires, change out filters, the basics. And beyond that, it starts to get complicated. I need a professional. But with these lawnmowers, I figured, well, they're not working, so they're useless to me now. What will it hurt if I watch a couple of YouTube videos with guys that really are mechanics that specialize in this kind of work, repairing a lawnmower or a pressure washer just like mine, because it is on YouTube and you can find it. So I watched about a half a dozen guys address the same problem. And son of a gun, I sat down there, got my tools out, and got me a good strong light, got down on my little bench in the garage, and before long I had that carburetor removed, disassembled, cleaned, put back together, reassembled, put fresh gas in the lawnmower, and she cranked right up. Same thing with the pressure washer. I had never done that before I was age 64. That was last year. Why did I never try such a thing before? Well, I was afraid to. I was afraid I'd really break it, and then I'd still have to take it to a mechanic, and then he would tell me it was beyond repair, and I'd still have to buy a new mower. But I decided, no, everyday ordinary people do things like this, and just maybe I can do it. And in the process, I saved myself somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 or $400 in repairs that the mechanic would probably laugh at, because he would have probably done that job in 15 minutes and had it back running in 20 and charged me $175 for the repair on a $300 lawnmower. So anyway, things like that stretch your brain. And now I want to talk to the men that are listeners. Have you ever used a cookbook? I'll ask that question. Have you ever really pulled out a cookbook, flipped through it, and looked for a recipe or read through them until you found something that interested you? I don't care if it's a dessert. I don't care if it's a main course. I don't care if it's a casserole. If you've never done that before and followed a recipe, what a great skill set to have. You stretch your brain, you learn the basics of how it's done, right down to setting the oven temperature at 350 or whatever it goes to, and baking the dish, and then you get the pleasure and also additional brain stimulation of finding out you're not that bad of a cook. Wouldn't that be a great thing to do at your present age? Now, I've tried to make candy. I am not a candy maker. That's a skill set unto itself. But with enough practice and enough sugar and enough flavorful ingredients, you could learn to make fudge. You could. And so anyway, I'm asking you, what are you doing to play with your brain and expand your realm of knowledge? I'd like to think about a friend of mine that lives in Michigan. Her name's Terry. Terry is a gifted seamstress. I don't think there's anything that she could not create with needle and thread and cloth or yarn. And, she's just one of those kind of people, And in fact, she made me a quilt a few years ago. And I'm still kind of awestruck by the fact that she made a quilt along a Navy theme for me, which made it really special. I still have it. I still sleep under it during the wintertime. But what if Terry had stopped at just crocheting, perhaps, and had never taken on new patterns or new stitches or new challenges, she'd still be really good at just doing small projects. But she kept working. And Terry, I hope you're listening, and I hope you don't mind me talking about this, and maybe some of it's speculative, but everybody started somewhere, and then their passion grew and their skill set grew, and then they continued to hone that skill set as they aged. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And the mind is planning the next project. The mind is seeing what it might look like in its finished state. The mind is picking particular colors, particular stitches, all this kind of stuff. Really, really stimulating for the brain. What if you put together jigsaw puzzles? That's something we could all do. The hunt and search for patterns is a tremendous brain-building skill. And is it going to save the world? No, but you have the satisfaction of completing something that was very detailed and maybe 1,000 pieces and took you 5 nights or a week to finish. And when you get done, what do? You tear it all apart and put it back in the box. You think someday I'll do this again. Your better choice is probably to donate that puzzle to a thrift store so somebody else can have the pleasure of doing the same. So playing with my brain. How am I going to play with my brain? A good way to play with my brain is to read things that take me to places I've never been, to tell me stories I've never heard, things that pique my curiosity, that keep me held in a state of suspense until I find out how the story resolves itself. Does she marry the guy? Does she kill him after she gets married? Does the cop solve the crime? Whatever the story is. Those kinds of things are very stimulating for our brains. And I can tell you this, I can remember just about every book I ever read. All you got to do is mention the author's name. I used to read Joseph Wambaugh stuff, and I can still remember those books from way back when. And so these days, I'm more into reading literature and stories that you would find in the National Geographic. Yeah, because I like that stuff. About places I've never been, animals and people and tribes and things I've never seen and never will in person. But to hear the stories of survival and thriving in their localities, whether it's human or beast, and I learn a little bit as I go. I don't retain everything I study, but because I'm a fitness trainer, I'm really interested in the science of how muscles work. How do they work? Why when I look at something over here laying on this chair, I can think I want it, and my arm and hand start going in that direction and pick it up and bring it back to me to use? Why is that? Fascinating combination of this thing up here talking to these things and this arm making an action happen. Yet I really didn't think about, okay, I want to hold that ballpoint pen that's right there on the desk. I don't have to think, okay, lift arm lifted, extend arm, open fingers, grasp pen, bring pen back, write on pad. Wow. I didn't have to think about any of that stuff. I just thought, pen, grab, and I had it in my hand. Your brain is a fascinating thing. What if I watch documentaries on things that interest me? Sometimes I watch blooper outtakes from TV shows I watched when I was a kid. I find that kind of stuff fascinating. It gets my funny bone. Laughter is good for my brain. It's playing with my brain. And I want to maintain a good sense of humor as long as I shall live. So what if I play with my brain on a regular basis? Yeah, I can do crosswords. I can work on a lawnmower. I can also do exercises that play with my brains. In our SAIL classes, and SAIL means staying active and independent for life. I teach about 60 to 70 people a week in these classes. We do balance exercises. And our brains are key to our balance. So is our inner ear. But what if we practiced balance in unique ways? What if we stood on one foot for 15 or 20 seconds without holding on to anything? And our brain remasters that skill of standing there on one foot for an extended period of time. All the while, it's firing corrections to our muscular and skeletal system to stay upright, not go forward, not go backward, not go left, and not go right. What if we played with our brains just like that? What if we did exercises that we hadn't done ever? Maybe never. Maybe you've never touched a dumbbell in your life, but now you attend a class and you have an instructor like me that says, okay, we're going to do bicep curls. Maybe you never knew the name of this muscle right here. Maybe you didn't. And there's no shame if you didn't, but what if you come to a class and you learn the names of the major muscles, and then you did exercises that require a skill set of lifting those weights just so at a certain rate to help you gain strength? Very stimulating for the brain. It's foreign to you. I know that some of the people that come to my classes the first day in, they're horrified. They didn't think it was going to be this intense, that there was going to be this huge variety of new skills that we were going to master. But if they stick with me for a few weeks, all those new skills are assimilated. So when I say we're going to do bicep curls, we're going to do overhead presses, we're going to do laterals, we're going to do washboards, we're going to do rows, whatever it is we're going to do, they instantaneously, like me grabbing for that pen, begin getting ready to do those kinds of lifts. What if they've never done a squat? At least not in a long time. And the instructor looks at them and says, okay, we're going to do half squats. We're going to do 10 of them. And I instruct them on how to do it. They get in the right position. Their feet are in the right position. And they go down to a semi-squatted position and they do it right. And it's difficult. Even if they're already having trouble standing up from a seated position, say from a pew at church or from a hardback chair at home. But what if I've got them doing that kind of stuff and the brain is remembering it used to do these things, and it remembers the neural pathway to make all these muscles work together? That's playing with the brain in a healthy way. So as you go forward, and I trust you plan to go forward, how are you going to take care of yourself? Body, mind, and spirit. Are you going to play with your brain some? Are you going to test your ability to solve problems? Are you going to expand your mind into new areas of knowledge, things that you've never studied before, things you've never read about before, things that you've never watched in a documentary? That's all good stuff for your brain. And, it's good fodder for conversation, too. How many times have I said to my wife, oh, I watched this documentary last night about the ocean sunfish. Now, when I said that, some of you know instantly what an ocean sunfish is. The first time I saw one in person was in 1980. I'm going to say it was 89 or 90. I was doing refresher training on the USS Truxtun off the coast of San Diego, California. So we're out in the Pacific Ocean, and we're cruising along in that nuclear-powered cruiser, and I'm up on about the O3 level, 3 decks above the main deck, and I'm looking down at the ocean. Sometimes we'd see things like flying fish or stuff like that was interesting. And there laying on the surface was this big flat pancake looking thing that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. And it was probably 6 feet across and 8 feet long. I'm just estimating. But it didn't look like a fish. It looked like a pancake with a couple of small fins on it. And it would be years before I realized that was an ocean sunfish. So what if I watched a documentary on unusual marine species, and the next day in conversation, I'm talking to my wife and I say, oh, wow, I saw this thing on ocean sunfish last night, and it was so fascinating, and where they spend the daytime, where they spend the nighttime, and something like that. So what we read and what we watch and what we study becomes fodder for conversation, which causes us to have to recall the name, the place, the situations, whatever it is. That's playing with your brain. Learning to do something you've never done before, like using a cookbook and cooking, fixing a lawnmower. Those are things that I consider to be playing with your brain. Taking exercise classes and doing exercises you've never done before, I consider that to be playing with your brain. And all these things work together to help you stay brain healthy. What about protecting our brains? I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here now. What about protecting our brains? We live in an unusual time, and I'm not just saying that generically because it's something a podcaster would say. You know, we live in an unusual time. The war in Ukraine, we may have a hard time understanding what that's all about, why Russia would do that, and I'm not going to go politics on this. It's complicated. Yet every night when you turn on the news, you're going to get a refresher about the war in Ukraine or this tragic earthquake that happened in Turkey and Syria. You're probably going to hear a story about another mass shooting or something like that, or a crooked politician or something like that. And taking in all of that stuff and trying to, as my wife says, wrap her mind around it and understand why, that's abusing your brain, because for some of these things there are no legitimate, reasonable answers, but we can find ourselves thinking about those things a lot. We could find ourselves thinking about homelessness a lot. We could think about human trafficking a lot. We could think about racism a lot. In fact, we could worry a lot about those things, and that would result in our overall stress levels going up. And so I've made a decision in the last year or so that I limit my amount of exposure to the ugliness of the world that comes through on the news channels. And there was a time when you could walk into our house at just about any time, and one of the news channels would be playing in the background. And all day long, we'd see breaking news. And every time I saw breaking news, my attention was drawn to the screen with a state that almost said, oh my gosh, what has happened now? What do I need to know about? Who attacked who? Who did what? Who committed a crime? What's going on? And it was just too much. It was just too much. And I decided to choose for myself to limit my exposure to the news to one short period every day and get the Cliff Notes, read my local newspaper, and not allow myself to be drawn into a state of hopelessness and stress because of this bombardment of terrible things. So I'm protecting my brain. And as I said in a previous podcast, I'm also protecting myself from people who are truly toxic. That's a whole nother subject. But it's something to think about, because I can get so many rabbits running around in this cage up here, or hamsters. You pick your animal, but it won't shut down. And when I need to go to sleep, I'm stressed and I don't even know why. I talked to a young lady the other day. She's about 74 years old. And we agreed on one thing. The number one thing that will disrupt our sleep is what we call rehearsing dialogues. What is rehearsing dialogues? That's when we go back to something that happened sometime in our life where we wished we had said, fill in the blank. That if I had to go back and do that all over again, I would have said this. I might would have told the person off. Or on the other hand, I might would have told him or her how much I appreciated them, how much I loved them. But that's history, and I can't change what happened in history. But yet I will sometimes think like that, and it's futile. It has no resolution, and it doesn't go away. And so one of the things I recommend to people to do, and I did this as a counselor, I would say when you find yourself rehearsing a dialogue with somebody about an issue that is never going to be resolved, an issue that happened in the past, the best thing to do is to out loud say, stop, and then think about anything else. I don't care it's about the stripes on a bumblebee or the different flowers you have in your garden. Stop and think about anything else. And I'm going to tell you a secret. I enjoy doing the podcast, but and then I will listen to it generally before I publish it, unless I'm quite satisfied with how it's turned out before I send it out to you guys. But later in the week, if I'm having a hard time going to sleep, I'll put the podcast on. I already know what I'm going to say, and I will listen. And usually within about 10 minutes, I've put myself to sleep. I shouldn't say that on a podcast, but it's true. I will put myself to sleep, and it shuts off automatically. So it's a done deal, and I'm in la la land, sawing logs and dreaming good dreams. Listen, tonight we talked in a sweeping, almost humorous and joking framework about playing with our brains, stimulating our brains, poking ourselves and encouraging ourselves to take interest in new things, new skills, new hobbies, new crafts, mastering something we've never mastered before. You could even learn to play guitar if you don't already play. You could learn to play guitar better if you do. Things like that, really stimulating to the brain. One of the things we've done in my second sail class is we mastered a dance move together. You know, and it wasn't an old-timey dance, it was the Cupid Shuffle. And there's something really delightful about seeing people from 60 to well on up in their 80s doing the Cupid Shuffle together. It's just fun. But we all had to learn the steps. That was awkward, but our brains received the music and the direction, and before long we're out there just shuffling to the right, to the right, to the right, to the left, to the left, to the left, and kicking, and doing this stuff as a group, which is also good for your brain. Doing things with other people is good for your brain, whether it's family, friends, coworkers, letting your hair down. I wish I could do that. Letting your hair down, relaxing, laughing, enjoying the good times together. One of the things we used to do at our campground up in Tennessee was at the end of the day, a lot of us would gather around campfires at our campsites, and we would tell stories, part of getting to know each other and sharing the backstories of our lives. Because nobody lived at the campground. We just all went there in the spring and stayed through the fall, and we made very good friends during that period of our lives. So there are things we can do to play with our brains that are really healthy for us. So if we do those kinds of things, from puzzles to crafts to repair jobs to reading, if we do those kinds of things and we blend in a healthy diet and, of course, some good quality exercise, our prospects of living to a ripe old age just go up, up, up. Until the next podcast, this is Gene Fleming. I wish you the best. If you like the podcast, share it with somebody, and you can always leave us feedback at the Pushing 60 Aside Facebook page. That is my business page. I don't do any business through it. I don't sell t-shirts. I don't sell protein. I don't sell online coaching or anything like that. I just have that page as a reference point to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, may the good Lord bless you.